I am Kyle Jellings. Actually, a special show here. Maybe we'll call it the Desert Solace Hour. But I'm here with Mark and Jerri Jorgensen, and it's a little special program here. You guys came all the way from St. George.
Correct.
Yeah, so you guys are here from St. George, Utah, and you guys run a place called Desert Solace. And you guys are friends of the station. You guys have been around. You guys have been around a long time, actually.
We've popped in and out a few times, yes.
Yeah. So you guys have been all over the place. And you guys are down here visiting? What are you guys doing down here?
Came down to see our friends and, Reagan Library, Disneyland, the whole.
Oh, Reagan Library.
The whole Southern California experience.
Oh,
there
nice.
you go.
Nice. Sounds good. Okay, so talk to me a little bit. Let's get right into it. Desert Solace. If you go to desertsolace.com, you can learn more about it. But it is an addiction recovery place. And this is one of those... It's kind of, I don't know how to describe it, but you deal with addiction to pornography. And I don't want to say it's a new addiction, because how long have you guys been in business?
We've been in business about 5 years.
So about 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, you guys probably know better than I would, but this is kind of, I do want to say it's kind of a new thing. It's a new trend in that... this maybe it just wasn't as readily available, or maybe I don't know. Maybe you guys can help me out a little bit with
Sure, be glad to. Yeah, you know, the idea of pornography itself has been around as long as there have been images. Probably
since the
cave drawings. Yes, exactly.
Lumiere brothers.
Exactly. And in the age of the magazines, of course, and Hugh Hefner's Playboy and all that, but the pornography industry really took off with the advent of the internet, of course, when the accessibility and the ease and the affordability really made it just really skyrocket, and its use has taken off since then. So figure about 10, 15 years, this is just really taken off.
And it's when I was in high school, when it was kind of like I want to get into how to recognize this being an addiction. And when I was in high school, it's kind of like, you even hear adults say this, it's just something that high school boys do, it's just something that, it's kind of the norm, right? But it can generate to be a problem, especially, I got a cell phone, a smartphone, you can access anything, That
goes back to that accessibility, idea. The idea of addiction is an interesting concept, because I've actually had an argument with a psychiatrist over this. Well, it's not an addiction in the sense that you're going to have, seizures and withdrawals, say a heroin addict or an alcohol, no DTs from withdrawal. However, if you want to call it addiction or compulsive use or whatever the idea is, I think the best definition of addiction I ever heard was not being able to get enough of something that you don't want. And that's true for, alcohol or drugs or something. Certainly a drug addict is compelled to use them. Their body has become dependent on it. And pornography and sex addiction, it's the same thing. The body, the brain, it specifically is craving access to that high. For that, the same chemicals are flooding the brain, and same hormones are the same, what's the word I'm looking for? Same,
The brain is, the chemicals in the brain are the same thing is happening.
Exactly.
Is what you're saying. Okay, so maybe explain to me, people, I feel like the argument is, what harm is it doing if somebody's, spending their time by themselves somewhere doing this, right? What harm do you guys see of this?
The harm comes when, of course, it starts to affect the person's ability to function in the rest of their life. Whether that be up all night binge watching and not able to function as a student or productive member of society. Certainly wives don't appreciate compulsive use of pornography. It affects marriages, it affects families. And as any other addiction, in the use of pornography, at some point, a more extreme version is craved. The gateway drug to, the gateway drug may be heroin, or to heroin may be marijuana, for example. But if someone, a pornography addict at a certain point, a Playboy magazine just doesn't cut it anymore. That's when they start to look for something more extreme, something more deviant or whatever, and that's when people will start to say, delve into, say, child pornography or more extreme forms of pornography, or start to act out on what they've seen on screen, and they may start to. That's when they'll go seek out extramarital affairs, seek out strip clubs and brothels or whatever it may be, or anonymous hookups, whatever. It can go any direction from there.
And, again, we're speaking with Jerri and Mark Jorgensen from Desert Solace. You can find out more information by go to desertsolace.com. And you guys have experience in this. I don't know if you could share your story a little bit, Mark. I know it's on. You can go to Desert Solace. You're one of the success stories, of course. But I wondered if you could maybe share your story a little bit.
Sure, be glad to. That is what motivated us to start this facility. This is something I picked up in magazines as a kid. I'm 50 years old now, and so this would have been in the mid 70s. There certainly was no internet. There was no videos. It was all magazines, and I and my adolescent friends would huddle around these magazines, and it was exciting and titillating, as you can imagine. But I grew to crave the viewing that, and it's something that I kept very secret. The thing about this addiction is it is very shame based.
And that's one thing, that this is one of those addictions that it's embarrassing. It's got to be, you know what I mean? I mean, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but it's one of those things that it's hard to admit to.
I do this for a living, and there is still a level of discomfort having this conversation with you. I'll admit to that. It is not something I'm proud to shout from the rooftops. However, I am in the sense that I know that other people are suffering from it. I know it is affecting their relationships. I know it is affecting their lives, and I know that they don't know what to do about it. And we've created this place to make that happen and realize what the underlying issues are and deal with that. And we'll get into that later, I imagine, as to what we do. But as far as my story goes, I pretty much suffered in silence for literally 30 years until I got to a point where I was actually called out by a friend who had experience in dealing with people that were struggling with this, and in an ecclesiastical setting within his church. And he said, he just flat out called me out. Says, "This is what I think you're doing." And I said, "Well, yeah, doesn't everybody?" Same thing you kind of said, that everybody does this. I've looked at it. It's not that big of a deal. But he says, "No, I think there's a bigger problem you're willing to admit," and says, "I think you need to get some help for it." And it wasn't until that point that I actually would dare tell anybody about it. And I sought treatment, sought some outpatient treatment where I worked with a therapist, and I did a program. They had a program that I learned a lot of good information and was excited about. I'd leave the class that they had. I'd leave the therapist's office all excited about, okay, I'm going to go take this on. I'm going to conquer this thing. And then the real world would hit me, and stress and pressure and all that, and I would escape to the only place I knew how, which is what addiction of any type is really about. It's about escaping. It's about getting away from life and getting away from pressure in an unhealthy way. And so that was where I knew to escape, and so that's where I would escape, and the cycle would just continue. And it wasn't until I actually took the time to remove myself from my life, from society, to go get residential help where I could be in a place outside of life, leave that behind, and just focus on myself and my healing, to where I could just work on those issues, try and take some serious self-examination and see why I was doing this, that I could finally work through those and figure it out. And I came out of there realizing that this is what I wanted to do, was to help others to overcome the same challenges.
And you saw the opportunity, and now Desert Solace. What was going through? Because you guys have a family. You guys have you guys have a family.
We have family.
You're married.
Kids, grandkids. The whole bit, yes.
What's going through your head while this is happening?
So I felt that there was kind of a disconnect, and another thing that I really learned through my own recovery, which means, because as a spouse, sometimes the spouses or even the family members kind of get overlooked in this addiction, just like any other addiction. All the focus goes on the addict.
Well, I think with this even less so because Kerry Quashen, you guys have met Kerry Quashen.
Yes.
You've been on his show before
Sure.
for Families in Action, and he talks about drugs, heroin, and stuff like that, and how it really affects those families because the heroin addict will go and steal from their own family. They'll do all these things. It's the same thing. You're being shut out of his life. You love him, and you're being shut out as well. So it's affecting you and your kids as well.
Absolutely. So it's that connection piece that sometimes is not addressed. It's like people sometimes will just focus on the sobriety. Just get them sober. And a lot of times people are just white knuckling it. Regardless of the drug, whether it is pornography, sex addiction, or whatever. So the point is that, something I learned in my recovery is that the opposite of addiction is not necessarily sobriety, it's connection. And because I felt I was disconnected and I knew there was something off, I knew there was something missing, I wasn't exactly sure what it was. When I learned what it was, my response was, oh, well, just stop it. Because my education level on addiction was zip. And so I just thought, oh, well, all right, well, let's just keep going and just don't do it anymore. Like that's an easy fix.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
that's when I started my education process as well, getting all the education I could and realizing that, it can be, we believe that it is an addiction, that, not everyone is addicted, but a lot of people get trapped in this. And because of the shame level, it just stays hidden, way longer than it should. And I think we're making strides on that. People are talking about it more. People are talking about, their marriages being dissolved. Divorce is just rampant. And I'm not going to say this is the number one cause, but it is one of the causes.
Certainly.
So my attitude through this was, I went, okay, well, I love this man and I know who he really is and he's got this problem and I'm in it for recovery. And I told him, I said, I'm here. I will take this journey with you, but it is going to be a journey of recovery or I'm not staying. I was very clear that I would not stay under those circumstances. I was crystal clear. And I think a lot of wives tend to think, well, how much can I push? Can I set a boundary? And that's something that I learned, and I learned it with a therapist, that it was very healthy to set boundaries, which is for my recovery. It's not a punishment for your loved one. It is for that family member's recovery and their healing, and boundaries are critical.
So you're talking about the thing you keep saying is my recovery.
Sure.
Now this was his addiction.
Absolutely.
Why is it your? Why do you use that language?
Because it is family. It is a family dynamic, and if I'm going to be in relationship with an addict, I get to have my own recovery. And so if I have wives that will call in and say, well, I'll send him to you, but just fix him. And I'll say, well, what are you going to do for you? Well, it wasn't my problem. I didn't cause it. I can't control him. I can't cure him, which are all true. And if they're going to stay in relationship, they need to get their own education and their own recovery because there's some trauma involved. I mean, when a wife finds out about this, or maybe to the degree that it has happened, it can be a form of betrayal, and that's traumatic. And even if it's just watching on the internet, even if it hasn't escalated to acting out, on other human beings. So, I got to have my own recovery because whether I stayed in the marriage or whether I left the marriage, I wasn't going to drag this to other relationships. Yeah. I needed to be healthy for my children, for my career, for everything that I do in life. And so, it was my recovery. And I would invite wives and if mothers, family members that, depending on the relationship with them, they should really, I would invite them to get their own recovery. It is critical because this is a family dynamic.
Yeah, and I appreciate you saying that, and I wanted to make sure and ask you that because I wanted people to hear that.
Yeah.
And I wanted to ask you, maybe I don't know if you guys have like stats or anything like this, but how many young people or young adults probably do have an addiction to pornography and probably don't even know it. I don't know. I don't know if you guys have read studies on this or anything like that.
Yeah, that is a tough question. We do know that the exposure rate for males specifically, and females are catching up and are almost at the same level, but the exposure rate by the time a young man is 18 is 100%. Everybody's
exposed.
Everyone has
At
been
least
exposed. At least has been
once.
exposed.
Okay.
And I've heard statistics ranging from different studies between 50 to 60% are regular habitual users of it. And of that, again, depending on your definition of addiction, and I define addiction as wanting to stop and not being able to. And of that population, I've heard statistics from 30 to 40% have an unhealthy use of internet pornography.
It's just this is something that blows my mind, that and maybe it's just because the situation I'm in and my religious beliefs and stuff like that, but what this creates in the mind, the expectations, stuff like it, being addicted to this and habitually watching it, what that creates in your mind for expectations for love and sex and stuff is just it's ruining relationships.
It is ruining relationships,
and it degrades both men and women.
It degrades everyone because they become objects.
Yeah.
They are not human beings. They are an object. What can I get from this person? Even if it's a virtual person, person that's just on the internet. But we go to a lot of conferences and talk to a lot of experts on this, and they're saying that when we first started this just 5 years ago, they were saying the average age of exposure was like 9 years old.
Oh my
They've
gosh.
dropped down to 5.
That makes my stomach hurt.
Yeah, and the reason is because these kids have iPads, and if it's not protected, then something will pop up. Now there will be, hopefully, and this is something that we really do. We speak a lot of places and we educate families that they have an open enough communication with their children that the kid feels safe to come to them. And these parents have got to start talking about that.
Yeah.
And so I had one lady at an audience that I was speaking at. She said, "Well, what age?" And I said, 3.
Oh,
she goes, "Well, how do I do that?" Well, I said, "Well, it's going to be appropriate, but starting as early as you're walking through the grocery store and they see a Cosmopolitan or whatever, and they just know that about talking about modesty and covering the bodies, and that that our bodies have this anyway. So it's age appropriate, but there's not too early of a time to start opening the dialogue where our children feel safe to come and talk to us about it."
Yeah. One last question I wanted to ask you guys before we go to break. We're speaking with Jerri and Mark Jorgensen from Desert Solace. You can find more information at desertsolace.com. And I wanted to ask you, going through this, how has it helped? And you talked about your own recovery, Mark, your recovery as well. How has it helped your relationship with one another?
Okay. We're going there now?
Yeah. I wanted to ask you before we went to break. Yeah.
Well, when Mark, he was just willing to do whatever it took. And, I had very clear boundaries, and he did want to heal. And so that's why he went to residential treatment, which for us, it saved his life, literally, and saved our marriage and saved our relationship. And going through that whole process was just, people say, "Oh my gosh, recovery, really, I have to go through this." There's a lot of joy in recovery because people are improving their lives. And, getting that connection back, whether, if you come from a spiritual background, getting that connection back with God, your higher power, whatever you want to call that, and the connection with the spouse, with the family. And so there's joy in that. And people say, "Well, do I have to keep doing this recovery forever? I mean, is he going to be an addict forever?" And I compare it to, I just say it's kind of like diabetes. You find out that you've got a condition, you treat it, and you test your blood, and you're testing yourself every day. Where am I? You do kind of a check-in, and you do the things that support you by reaching out. And if you get triggered, you know what to do, and that's stuff that we teach at our center, and we're not just about changing behavior. It's a transformational process where they actually go through and they have a change of heart, and it's fabulous.
And so, Mark, I want to ask you the same question. How's it helped your relationship with your family?
Well, this is actually a second marriage for me, and my first marriage, as I got into recovery, I realized that my first marriage failed over this issue. And that sounds strange because it really didn't, because we never talked about it, and that's probably exactly why. The shame was so deep over it that I actually tried to bring it up with her once, and she didn't want to talk about it. But the disconnection stayed. The disconnection remained, and we just weren't close. We just drifted apart slowly, more and more, so till it was finally there was nothing there to salvage. And so, in retrospect, I can look back and say, yeah, this addiction killed my first marriage. And so I certainly didn't want that to happen again. And so as I realized that, hey, this was me hiding from life, this was me hiding from having a real connection with a wife and building a life together, and learn the tools to do that, then, as I learned to do that, of course, we grew closer, and, we're stronger than we've ever been before. So yeah, it's been awesome.
Fantastic. Mark and Jerri Jorgensen, this is a special Desert Solace Hour. You can learn more by going to desertsolace.com. I want to talk after the break. This is after the break.
Okay,
this
thank
time,
you.
after the break, I want to talk about the treatment process. Maybe some people don't know. I certainly don't know anything about it, so I'd like to learn more about the treatment process for pornography addiction and sexual addiction. We're going to take a quick break. This is AM 1220 KHTS.